Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Deep Dive Film School uses the footage only for purposes of education, commentary, and criticism under fair use. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we are going to go over our top 5 movies of the 2010s, best movies of the decade. Here we go!
It's the end of the year, let's dive on in! It is the end of the year. End of the decade. Yeah, even bigger, even better. So,
this was hard to do.
It was really hard to do. I think that there's this idea of like, when I really started thinking about like, okay, the last 10 years, and like really it's 9 years because we're starting from 2010. So
yes, but 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, that's still 10 years of movies.
I guess that's true.
Math.
I don't know. It's really interesting because I think that, like, can you think of any particular trends or things that obviously I'd say that when did Iron Man, the first Iron Man, come out? Was that because I feel like in 2010,
that
I believe
before 2010, I think.
But 2010 was it 2010 or 2011 that was the final Christopher Nolan Batman movie? I think Dark Knight Rises is like 2010. Yeah. So it was kind of the end of like this thing that we remembered as being like, you know, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight and sort of that era. And so it was really like this last decade has been totally owned in a lot of ways by Marvel.
Oh, big time.
And just that entire thing. And that was one thing I want to talk about really quick before we dive into this.
Before you do that, I think one of the biggest trends is liking and subscribing at Deep Dive Film School. Because we forgot to say that. So please do that if you like what you see /share. All right, on to Marvel.
Segue king.
Thank you. I'm trying to make it a trend of 2020s.
No one's going to notice at all. They're going to feel like, God, he's so good. I didn't even see that banner pop up.
Especially because they keep talking about it.
The conversation just was so natural. It flowed so well. You know, when I was really thinking about, obviously, we'll get into cinematic universes. That was a huge part of the last decade.
No doubt.
But I think that one of the things that spurred the whole concept of a cinematic universe was actually, if you think about it, in the last decade, around 2008, 2009, you started seeing things like, okay, Breaking Bad started in 2008, Walking Dead started in 2010, Game of Thrones started in 2011. So you had like these pretty monumental TV series where people were doing this thing that they really hadn't done since the 80s and 90s, which was like weekly talking about a series again in this really intense way, right?
Yeah.
In fact, pre-Breaking Bad, the one before that would have been what, Lost? Like it just was. Yeah. It wasn't that ubiquitous.
Television definitely changed what movies became.
And it was happening through streaming services too, right? Yeah. I mean, I think Orange is the New Black, I want to say that was
one of Netflix's first ones,
maybe 2010, and it was the same thing where it was just like everybody was talking about it. It was actually making a lot of money. House of Cards, all these other series started coming out, and I think that what movies realized they had to do is become serialized in a different way.
Sure.
Right? And so you did see,
which I appreciate.
Sure, same here. And I think the two big ones obviously is Marvel and Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
And so both of them are creating these like cinematic universes, but there is something also scary about that, right?
For sure. I think the other trend that I would pick out too is just remakes in general. Everything's a fucking remake now.
Yes.
You cannot make an original movie. That's why I love going to stuff like Sundance. Even though not every movie is amazing or whatever, at least I'm seeing original stories for the most part.
Right.
And stuff that actually had lower budgets and stuff that it was hard to make, and it has this. There's a reason it was made, and there's these really poignant.
You got it.
Poignant moments.
Yeah.
In these movies that end up going on to do good to pretty good. Rarely do a lot of them come out. I don't know. I guess something like Moonlight was at Sundance and ended up winning Best Picture.
Well, and I imagine that that's probably more of what, when we're looking at our lists and what we've decided to talk about is it's like at the end of a day, it's a guy with a Bic pen and a notebook writing his ideas down. It's not committees, right? And that's so many movies in the last decade were made by committee.
For sure. And I think we can't ignore that, obviously. Like the Marvel universe is great in its own ways. And, I think we're probably a little Marvel drunk and we're just used to it or whatever. And it just kind of, you just get kind of like, it's fine. They're fine. And most of the time, they're really good. Endgame was awesome.
Right.
It was a really good movie.
Civil War was cool. I thought that was a really good one.
I agree. Yeah. They have solid movies. Thor Ragnarok's one of my favorite Marvel movies. It's a great one.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
But so there's that. But, like, that is its own thing. The thing is, like, what we see in the theaters now are usually big blockbustery types of movies.
Right.
Because they have to have full world appeal now if these guys want to make any money back.
Right.
So they have to, appeal to the Asian countries who don't care as much about story and just want to see big, awesome action, right?
Right.
And that's how they do it, is through the language of action, right? And that's how, the new Avatar movie is going to make $300 billion or something.
Exactly. Well, like, just going back to last week's movie, it's like even Home Alone 3 in 1997 grossed $80 million. I will never not. That's going to be in the back of my head for the rest of my life.
Sandwich movie.
Yeah, sandwich movie. How many sandwiches could you have given to the poor instead of making this movie? Probably a lot. A couple other interesting things that happened in this decade, I think. Special effects have officially gotten to a point where we are doing a series of Disney remakes based upon themes that even 10 years ago you would never have been able to do, where you're like, it's quote unquote live action.
It's not live action. It's computer graphics.
Right, exactly. But you're doing The Lion King and you're doing The Jungle Book and you're doing Aladdin and you're doing all these different things.
Anything that has any kind of built-in nostalgia. Blah.
Let's remake it.
Yeah.
Well, and then speaking of built-in nostalgia, let's talk about bringing people back from the dead, like Carrie Fisher in Rogue One, or Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin, right? Like, we're bringing these people back. We're de-aging Samuel L. Jackson for a Marvel movie for continuity's sake, because one of them took place in the 90s, but we need to make sure that we have his character in it, right? And it's like, for better or for worse, some of them are better than other ones, but like, it's kind of a terrifying concept. I don't know if you've heard that they're talking about putting James Dean in a World War II movie. I did not make that up.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Technology definitely has changed things, but I would have to say that visually, your movie can't just look awesome anymore. Like, sure, Avatar looks awesome. Every fucking movie looks awesome now because everyone has the same technology. And for the most part, everything looks really, really good. The people that are producing movies do an amazing job, and they have this amazing technology and these tools that they get to use to create all this great stuff that we get to see. And it's fun and awesome, but like, when we saw Fellowship of the Ring the first time, we had never seen anything quite like that with this, from a scale perspective.
Right.
Now that's like in every movie. I hope practical effects come back in some way in the 2020 generation of movies, decade of movies, because I think you can still elegantly use this, but you have to have a story.
Right.
You have to have an interesting plot, character, story arc, twist, whatever the hell it is that you're going for. It better be good.
Right. Well, let's hear about some good ones. Now, that's how you do a segue.
But do they like and subscribe?
Let's start with. Do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, I can start.
What do you think? Yeah.
Okay. My number 5 is a movie which one of our past listeners actually did some effects work on, and it was a movie that kind of came under the radar, but for me is absolutely one of the tops of the decade. It's Under the Skin by Jonathan Glazer.
Yeah.
It's like nothing I've really ever seen before, honestly. It's got this weird Kubrickian feel to it, but it's with horror and sci-fi, but it like really has patience, right? You get these scenes on her ship, whatever it may be. I mean, they essentially walk into a house, but it's this big black melty room.
I mean, it's where Stranger Things got all the ideas for when
completely.
Eleven is like inside of her mind. Like,
absolutely.
Like the first time I saw that, I was like,
down.
Glazer, you might want to do a cease and desist on Stranger Things here, because they just bit your style, dude.
But you really absorb this world where she's going around kind of luring these people, and it's not out of a super violent way. But it's like subtle, and it's like sexy. Like she's trying to be sexy.
Yeah,
human.
it's meditative. Yeah. It's very meditative.
Yeah, there's a Starman element to this movie almost.
Oh, for sure.
Where she's kind of discovering what the world is through an alien, being a human, but in an alien in a human's body.
She also it seems like she suffers an accident and has amnesia as to whether or not she's an alien. She doesn't know what she is, which is a really interesting twist also.
Becoming a little more human, very much like Starman. Yeah. But just the tone, the music that it's set to, amazing. The music is absolutely just keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's so wild. And it just ramps up this tension, but it's truly like a movie I haven't seen before.
Yeah.
It was outstanding to watch. It was completely original. He's the guy who did Sexy Beast, so he's got some style and he knows what he's doing.
Also the movie Birth. I don't know if you ever saw Birth.
The Nicole Kidman one?
Yeah. It's a little bit closer to Under the Skin in that it's using, it's more of a supernatural element about reincarnation. But there's similarities just in the tone there, whereas Sexy Beast is like an incredibly different animal.
For sure.
All the way around. But
different
still
beast.
Just like, it's a different beast. But yeah, I love Under the Skin. It is fantastic.
Yeah, it's just one that always sticks with me, and I feel like gets a little bit swept under the rug, especially when we're talking about the best movies of this decade.
Right.
This is really hard to do, by the way. Like,
it's really hard. I'm leaving a lot of stuff off.
A lot of stuff.
Really
we can
liked.
hit some of those, I think.
Yeah.
Near the end if we want to. But what is your number 5?
My number 5. I think that this last decade was an incredible decade for horror movies. I think we saw a lot of directors either kind of come out of nowhere, whether you're talking about Jordan Peele or I'm thinking of somebody like Robert Eggers with The Witch.
Oh, yeah.
Ari Aster, obviously, with Hereditary and Midsommar. And David Robert Mitchell's It Follows. Like, there's lots and lots of really good ones. And although we've seen this director do a lot of other things that are either unsettling or sometimes just straight up violent, I think the creepy aspect here harkens all the way back to someone like Adrian Lyne with Jacob's Ladder. But my number 5 is the 2010 movie Black Swan.
Wow.
I just think,
huh?
I think that this Aronofsky film, it really kind of set the tone for a lot of things that happened in this decade when it came to psychological horror. You even think of something like The Babadook, right? It's like there's almost more actual pointed out, there's a monster. There's almost more of that in Black Swan than there even is in The Babadook. Sure. Like, there's this sense of subtlety of whether, are we talking about mental illness? Are we talking about grief? Are we talking about fear? And I love that it's put within this realm of, again, to go back to, Powell and Pressburger film, The Red Shoes.
Yes.
But, there's a similarity here of the competitiveness. Obviously, the character of Nina that Natalie Portman plays has some mental illness. She has eating disorder. We see that early on. But she's also pushing herself to be the best artist that she can be. And there's this sense of, like, how do we lose ourselves through the creative process for this young woman who is obviously very naive and very sheltered. Incredible performance by Barbara Hershey as her mother here, but
I think it has similar tones and intensity to something like Under the Skin too. I think
definitely.
I think it matches that.
Well, and the other movie that it reminded me a lot of, also in the same way of just making you feel kind of icky, would be the movie Nightcrawler, which also came out in the same decade.
On just missed my list. It's on the top.
It's surprising how many movies there are in the last decade, and I wonder if it's because Facebook debuted in 2009, right? That was really that was when it got, I think that was when it officially hit like some of its highest numbers, was in 2008, 2009. there's a lot of movies in the last decade that are about content creators,
sure,
right? About people who are artists or makers, and what that does to their soul, and what that does to who they think that they are. They lose their identity through the process. And definitely Black Swan is one of those.
Absolutely, it's a Aronofsky's. You know, I think he's a generational director. I think he's done a lot of good stuff. I never saw Mother. And I never saw. I wasn't a huge fan of Noah, but almost everything else he's done.
Mother has problems, and one of the big problems is, it had so much potential.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like it becomes too literal through its translation of the messages it was trying to say.
Interesting.
And that's where it stumbles, because on its way there, you're like, oh, I'm with this, and then at some point you're like, okay, where are we at now?
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a problem. That's without giving too much away, but yeah,
for sure. But for the most part, he's a really solid director, and Black Swan, absolutely. I didn't even think of that one. I thought it may have came out a little earlier, but so well done.
Yeah.
He is a master of aspects. He can really, he knows when to ramp up. I mean, you think of Requiem for a Dream, and what a perfect movie from an aspect perspective that is, and how all the music and the acting and the way things look, and you know, the close-ups of the eyeballs when they get high and stuff like that kind of stuff all mashes together so beautifully, but in this horrific way.
Well, and there's these patterns,
I think
right?
Black Swan does a very similar type of thing.
It does. It totally does. Well, and it almost becomes like talismanic of like, and he always loves this sort of like almost pattern or rhythm to what we obsess over.
And I will gladly watch any Natalie Portman lesbian scene.
I knew you had to throw that in. They're way both too skinny. Like not to make too fine a point of the Black Swan thing, but it looks like two birds trying to make out. I'm like, ugh, it's not good.
You shut your mouth.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sticking my guns on this one.
All right, my number 4. My number 4 is a documentary. It is the Banksy documentary, Exit Through the Gift Shop. This movie is, I mean, I think all of these movies in a way are like something we haven't seen before, right?
Yeah.
That's why they're the tops. That's why they stick out. That's why, you know, I don't know. This is a movie, like many of these, that I can pop in at any time and get drawn in and hooked on.
Right.
And it's also a movie, I don't know, rarely does a movie test your views of what is art, right? And this movie does it in a lot of different ways. You know, like, okay, so Mr. Brainwash, who this movie ends up being about, wanted to make a movie about Banksy and street art, and Mr. Brainwash ended up becoming the subject of the movie.
Yeah, because Banksy knew he was a poser.
Exactly. And so
I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's a great twist to the movie. And who knows how real that is, actually.
Yeah, you don't know.
But you also, underneath all of this, Mr. Brainwash stuff, where he's kind of ends up becoming a street artist himself and is mashing things up. And is that really art if he's stealing other people's art and mashing it up and making his own thing? And what does that mean?
This is the graffiti version of F is for fake.
For sure. Absolutely.
Right?
Oh, that's a great way to put it, actually. It totally is. But you also get Mr. Brainwash, who has, in the last 15 years, taped everything he's done every day.
Yeah.
And so we get all of this awesome footage on top of that.
Shepherd Ferry, of all these
but you
old
also get
hard
the
hitters,
history of street art,
Yeah.
and all these different perspectives from these different guys who have totally different styles in different countries and do all these different things. And so you get that on top of this what is art anyways, with Banksy's clever ass shit that he puts in there.
Well, and then also to go a layer even deeper than that is that is the way that Banksy's art being treated now, is that paramount to him selling out, even if he still is anonymous, because people are cutting out parts of walls to hang in museums, right? And he hates that stuff. And so it's like there's this interesting subtext there where he's basically saying, well, Mr. Brainwash could be me, right? And so if Mr. Brainwash is willing to sell out in this way that I'm not, then why don't you just go buy all of his crap instead?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden the worth of that art, here, for sure. It's super meta, and that ties perfectly into my next one, which is actually also very meta and very much lives in the same realm as Mr. Brainwash. Like if we accept the fact that Mr. Brainwash is this poser that, well, he only really becomes the poser and the sellout because Banksy decides to turn the camera back on Mr. Brainwash, right? And it's through the act of turning that camera around that all of a sudden Mr. Brainwash starts acting very differently than he did before, right? And he is sucked into all of this. I think the Joshua Oppenheimer documentary, The Act of Killing, is something very similar, right? You think about this idea of, well, what he wanted to do was to really shine a light on these horrifying mass executions in Indonesia of all these, so-called communists done by the government there, who then became these rock stars, right? Like essentially of being these assassins, of killing all of these people. But it was like,
but living in the fame of it,
living in the spotlight of it, even all these years later. And it was this idea of Oppenheimer was like, well, how do I tell that story in a way where I could actually get these guys to really open up and talk about it? And it's like he understood from an early standpoint that he can't go in there wagging his finger at them as this Westerner and saying, how dare you, because these guys would just be like, nah, shut their door and not talk to him. So instead, he put on this essentially like this theatrical version of like, oh, well, we're going to make a movie reenacting as, whatever you want. If you want it to be a 1980s Die Hard movie and you're Bruce Willis,
so weird,
we'll do that. Or if we're going to do a Western, we could do that. Or we could do it like we could do it as a musical. And what he ended up capturing, I think, is one of the most, yours are more in an order and mine are less so. This is one of the most interesting and divisive films. Anytime that you meet anyone who's into documentaries, just if you've got some time, ask them if they've seen this.
Yeah.
Because you'll have a different conversation with every single person that you meet. Some people think that Oppenheimer is incredibly brave and that he has done something that has reshifted the landscape of what a documentary could be. Other people think that he has no ethics and that he should never have done this. Yeah. And you know what I mean? It's like the opinions are across the board. And I love
both of these movies, both of these documentaries really make you question ethics, like you said, politics, the legitimacy of art and what is construed as art, probably
the responsibility of the messenger
to
make the art.
How responsible is that person? Hey, I'm just there, I'm just hitting record and filming these, I'm a fly on the wall. Which most of my favorite documentaries are the fly on the wall documentaries.
Well, right? And it makes you also wonder those. It's like, compare that to another one of the biggest phenomenons in the last decade, Making a Murderer. Right, there was this Netflix series that like broke all records for any kind of docu-series.
But it had been done 100 other times with other documentaries, which is funny.
But then one of the big interesting things is that everybody came out of it with their own opinions, only to find out later the same thing happened with the Robert Durst docu-series The Jinx, is that in both cases the directors and producers had fudged with the footage and left out a bunch of stuff they didn't want to talk about to make you think, in one case in The Jinx, he's totally guilty. And it's like, turns out that's not true. They totally edited that footage to make it look like he confessed to it.
Kill them all, of course.
Never actually happened. In the case of Making a Murderer, left out tons of footage that actually made that main guy, whose name I can't remember now, but seemed like he was utterly being thrown underneath the bus for a crime he didn't commit. And it's like, no, there's a bunch of other evidence out there that the filmmakers decided to leave out. And so it's like, I love that this target is constantly shifting and moving. The only difference is that with both of these documentaries that we're talking about, they're about the fact that target moves and shifts.
Yeah, exactly.
And I really like that because it makes it really uncomfortable for the viewer. Right?
Absolutely. Oppenheimer's movie is absolutely just, the acts of killing is just stunning. Weird, and they don't leave anything out in that one.
No,
just
it's
like,
all there.
Yeah, and it exposes a lot about the guy that they're talking about. Just like their lifestyle. It's just culturally completely opposite of what we're used to. And it's just like they're living off of movies. in a way, right? They're trying to emulate movies very much like The Wolf Pack or something like that.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
That type of thing where they're just like, to them, Scarface is the greatest movie ever, right?
Yeah.
And they just want to be Scarface.
Never stopping to be like, oh, he's a bad guy.
Oh,
right?
They want to be the bad guy.
They want to be the bad guy. Yeah, it's very, very strange. But
it's an effective movie, no doubt. It wouldn't even make my probably top 20, but I absolutely see why.
I've watched it several times, and I feel like any time that it kind of comes across my radar, I start thinking about it for days again.
He's got a Herzog feel to his
very
docs,
much
for sure,
so. And obviously Herzog as well as
Errol Morris.
Errol Morris.
Yeah,
the two of them together co-produced this.
Oh, that's
documentary.
Right. Oh,
so.
Okay. Well, that makes more sense. I forgot about that. Well, let's talk about another documentary, because my number 3 is another documentary. And this is one that I was battling. Should I put this on here? Should I not? And I ended up ranking it higher than Exit Through the Gift Shop. And it is Sarah Polley's Stories We Tell.
I'm so glad you put this on your list, because it barely didn't make mine. And I kept thinking about it, and I was like, I love that documentary so much, but it didn't make it.
It's wonderful. It's this wonderful little story about her parents and her family, and like her parents' history, and then this moment in her life that kind of ends up defining her life a little bit. But it's done so classy, and it kind of makes you nostalgic for for family, but also just for like a different time. This is like, all this footage of her mom and her parents growing up together, and them, coming up through the theater industry, and they were very different people, but they got married anyways and had this family and everything. And
there's a secret here. Yeah, we don't need to spoil anything, but there's a secret, and the twist you really don't see coming.
You really don't. And honestly, the twist is what ended up making me put this on my best movies of the decade, because you don't see it coming, and the reveal was shocking to me.
Yep.
And it just made this really good movie into an absolutely great movie, and one of the best of the decade, if you ask me.
I want her to do another doc.
Oh, me too. And she has narrative movies that are excellent as well. But this one, something about how she tells it's very charming and fun, and like her dad and her family are getting interviewed.
I want her dad to like read me stories at night so I can fall asleep to his voice. He has the best narrator voice.
He's amazing, and he narrates most of the movie.
And which just makes it so much
wonderful,
more interesting.
And it's rich, and it's full, and it does things with the medium of film that I wasn't expecting, and made me go, whoa, what is happening?
Yes.
And I obviously am not going to spoil what that is, but I highly recommend it. But if I pitched you this movie and said, hey, I'm going to make a documentary about my family and this weird shit that happened, sounds stupid, right?
Well, you're like, who else is going to care other than you? Exactly, but it's so much about identity, and it's so much about everyone's story, right? And literally the title itself is so indicative of the larger message that she's trying to get across, which is every family has this.
But also,
theirs are different.
Also, how do we remember the stories of our lives?
Yeah.
How are we telling? The stories we tell? How true are they? Are they true just because we remember the good things? Really
that's why it's not called stories about us. It's stories we tell.
Stories we tell. Yeah, and so she has this great angle and artistic way and fun, cute, amazing way that she makes this movie. And there's a real story here. There's a real story behind everything.
Definitely.
This movie floors me. I think about it a lot, actually.
Yeah, me too.
And I really am happy that we ended up talking about this movie when we did, because it was just, man, it's just, I can't really completely put words to how much
it's really powerful.
Effective this is.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
And anyways,
I agree. That's a great one, man.
Yeah,
I'm so glad that it ended up on your list, because like I said, I had been thinking about it for sure.
All right.
My next one, Wes Anderson's great.
Yeah.
He's great. And in the last decade, if you count, I mean, it came right at the towards the end of 2009 was Fantastic Mr. Fox. Mm-hmm. So if you add that one in, then you really have Fantastic Mr. Fox, Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel, and Isle of Dogs.
Okay.
So that's 4 in the last decade. That's, give or take, right?
Yeah.
But I think that to me, the apex of his career, and maybe it'd be amazing if there's one, whatever his next film is even bigger focus than this. But I have to say, Grand Budapest Hotel is one of the most marvelous films. It really is. And it's funny I'm saying this because Fantastic Mr. Fox actually is a Roald Dahl novel.
Yeah.
But Grand Budapest Hotel...
Also a marvelous film.
Yes, also a marvelous film. Grand Budapest Hotel is like living in a Roald Dahl world. I mean, it is so rich with characters and detail,
depth,
and stylization, and here's an interesting one.
Physical and emotional depth.
Yes, physical and emotional depth. And here's an interesting one that's very different than a lot of Wes Anderson films. Time. Eras and eras of time. Most of the only other one I can think of that goes back through eras, not even as much as this, but to a lesser extent, would be Royal Tenenbaums. This sort of slips back and forth.
It's like the history of the family. Here it's the history of the hotel.
It's the history of the hotel. So we go back and to like so much nerdy detail where he's literally changing aspect ratios depending on what era the movie is in, right? So as the movie slips back, our very beginning phase where we actually have the girl putting the medal on the statue is in our regular sort of 16:9, like, you know, but then it goes, bookends, and as it goes back and slips through different decades, not only does the building itself change to the 1970s and this kind of like, shabby, browns and mustard colored, it folds into itself. It folds into itself. Yeah. And boy,
even if it's a quick cutaway of a reference from the beginning of the movie, it's still elegant and beautiful. Also, probably one of his funniest movies.
Easily.
This movie is hilarious.
It is hilarious, but it has its twee moments. But it also has some real stakes that don't occur in most of his other films either. Like, we see Jeff Goldblum get his fingers cut off by a door in this thing. People die. People get murdered, right? We have fake Nazis. We have stop motion chases with skiers. You know, we have these amazing miniature sets of not just the hotel itself, but also those weird little gondola things they go into. There's so much depth here, and then so much genuine love between Ralph Fiennes' character and I can't remember the young actor's name, but he is incredible too. But just this like genuine love that they have for one another that like is delight.
Lobby boy.
It's take your hands off my lobby boy, right? And there's delight in that, and it kind of like. It keeps one-upping itself in these really interesting ways where it becomes more delightful, right? And even sillier. But then again, there's real stakes and people die. And like it keeps kind of switching back and forth. And there's just so much whimsy there that I feel like it's in a world of Zack Snyder sour colors and Michael Bay swirling explosions. This really remembers that movies can make our eyes feel good. Like that watching a movie, you can just see something that makes you laugh the way that you did when you were a little kid. And it doesn't mean that it has to be a movie for a baby. It just means that it can be a moment where you're like, whoa, that's really cool. They showed a cutaway of the hotel and like a little stop motion figure like running up and down the stairs. Like, that's really cool. And that's all it needs to be, right? And that like a movie can just be enjoyable in that way.
Absolutely.
And I've watched it so many times, and every time I feel like I catch something new. And it's just this fantastic world that you want to go and like live in for a little while and just have fun in it. But boy, it's just, I feel like that all the rest of the movies of the last decade, all the work that he did on the miniatures all the way back to Steve Zissou's Life Aquatic, Steve Zissou. How do you say? Zissou. All the way back to the miniatures that he did with that, and then through the stop motion experiments he's done over the years. Don't get me wrong, Isle of Dogs I think is fantastic, but all of it really culminates in this movie.
I agree. I believe I'm with you. I think it's probably his best movie, and he's got some great ones.
He definitely does.
Rushmore, Royal Tenenbaums, you nailed them, but this one is special. It stands out as being its own. You know, even though it still has those Wes Anderson moments and the kitsch and the feel to what he does and the sense of humor and the rock songs and all that stuff, it has all that stuff, but it stands out above the rest to me. And I think it's totally warranted. It just missed my list as well Great movie.
Just love it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, my number 2. I mean, both my remaining movies, you know, everyone is in their prime here, right? Like, but my number 2 here is The Master.
Almost made my list.
P.T. Anderson's The Master. Joaquin Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, so 2 of the greatest actors of this generation, and them chewing scenery together in a P.T. Anderson movie. Probably his most beautiful movie, by the way.
Agreed.
Absolutely gorgeous movie. 70 millimeter, looks awesome. Just like the color of the ocean and like just the angles that he takes of
the
him.
Depth.
You know, obviously like
the
There Will Be
shots.
Blood has some amazing shots and stuff like that, but here it's like it seemed bigger and bolder, and the colors were deeper for some reason, but you get this weird window into basically Scientology.
Yeah.
And you get this Ron L. Hubbard character. I think it's Lannister something. I forgot his name in the movie.
What's it called? The plan? Isn't that what it's called? What's the
Yeah, I think it's the plan.
Yeah.
But it's about like finding inspiration through these people that are mad. I mean, they essentially take Joaquin's character and, you know, that's his muse to try and fix. Like, he's this alcoholic. He continually gets kicked out of bars and wakes up. He mixes this drink and
out of like formaldehyde, or no, out of I think it's out of. Isn't it out of the fuel in the boat?
Yeah, something
that's
like that.
That's what it is.
Like,
that's where he gets kicked out of the Navy, I think.
That's right. But he's like this degenerate, basically, and he's a Navy man, and he somehow wakes up on his boat, and they go through this whole quiz and all this stuff, and it's just like
that sequence is incredible.
Yeah, one of the best scenes of the year.
Incredible.
But finding inspiration through helping those to make yourself feel better, but it also goes into a thing of, you know, your indulgences, how those kind of form you as a person, right? Like, whether you think they do or not, they do. I don't know. It's just a powerhouse of a movie. And again, P.T. Anderson in his prime, every aspect is outstanding here. It's probably, gosh, I mean, does he have a bad movie? Probably not. I don't know. I guess I
didn't like Inherent Vice.
I
didn't like it at all.
We didn't like that one.
The tone is all wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is so weird for him because.
But this came after Inherent Vice. Mm-hmm. Or no, I'm sorry. This came before it.
But yeah, Inherent Vice is the only one, and I don't know what happened there because not that I hate that movie, but I'm like, I saw that once and was like, I never need to see that again.
Yeah,
I didn't like it at all.
His next movie is about high school. So
really?
We'll see that.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay, my next one here, in a decade where Marvel ruled the planet with its big old Thanos fist, my next one, Birdman.
Oh yeah,
is the anti-comic book movie.
It's the one I had to leave off.
It is. I mean, first of all,
I wish every movie was like this movie.
I wish every movie was like this movie too. The way that it's stitched together, as if it really is this one long train of thought that somehow moves backwards and forwards through time, through space, in a completely non-linear way, but makes perfect sense within Michael Keaton's character's head,
yeah, and in Uratu's head too. I mean, we get this
in Uratu, very much so.
It's this one shot, constant shot that just plays like jazz, like the soundtrack hints at, right?
Yeah, it's just it's this percussive, like nonstop,
and it keeps going. And you keep going in and out of these people's lives, and the funny things they say and do, and the weird idiosyncrasies of each character. Yes. And I could watch it all day.
Yeah. If the movie was 5 hours long, I would just, oh my God, like you could just sit and watch and watch and watch. But the themes here are so timely.
Are obviously huge.
Watching our former heroes get old and gray and wrinkled, the difference of being squashed into formulaic franchise safety versus putting your neck back on the chopping block for art's sake, and then having to contend with your own ego to try and do that, right?
Keaton's so good here.
And your own fear of becoming obsolete. I mean, it's just incredible. Like all of these themes and the fact that it's Keaton. Norton, right? Like is again this meta level of the, his Batman self telling him, right? I mean, that's who this Birdman character is that keeps kind of coming back, haunting him through all this time.
He kind of narrates.
And then the fact, again, to go to another meta level, that you've got Edward Norton here, who is not only also had his own legacy of being the Incredible Hulk, but then beyond that, also dealing with his own issues in Hollywood of being the guy who wants to come in and rewrite lines. And here he's doing, that's who his character is. It's like all these levels and layers to it.
The cast is outstanding here.
Well, it's the parsley, right? It's the after you need the palate cleanser after you've watched the big budget comic book movie.
Yeah,
Birdman is that palate cleanser. It's like, okay, I had a little mint and now I feel okay again, because it takes all of those ideas and says, yeah, this is all bullshit. The whole thing's bullshit. Like, movies and making art and doing any of this stuff is bullshit, because even our main character has decided that he's going to become a thespian again after having already done his comic book movies in his youth, because he wants to become relevant. But then when the one critic that he runs into in the bar tries to kick him the nuts about it, he tries pulling the rock star card like he's hot shit again, when he hasn't been in anything relevant for the last 20 years. And I'm like, I love that we went there with him. Right? Is that it's, yes, we feel for him of what it's like to be obsolete.
Yeah.
But then we also are like, yeah, but you're still a punk. Like, you're both, because that's the real world. The real world has all that nuance to it. And I like, it's just a fantastic film.
The execution is fantastic. It keeps you on your toes constantly.
The story would have been fantastic if it was told totally linear.
Yeah.
With hard cuts and hard edits and taking place over weeks or months. Like, it would still be so timely. But then to do this with it.
Absolutely. And almost every character here is unpredictable, right? You don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to react. I mean, we have this great shot of him in his underwear in Times Square.
Just
and it's
huffing
just,
it down the street.
And it's just like, hey man, don't be a dick, sign my thing.
Don't be a dick.
So he signs it. He's like, you're fucking awesome.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, okay. And it just keeps going. We get these amazing wide shots with the Birdman character flying over the city. It's just stuff that you're like, I don't even know
Never seen
what
it before.
I'm looking at.
He's made some outstanding movies. That's his best movie.
Easily.
Hey, come on, don't be a dick. Let me get an autograph. Dude, you fucking rock.
So awesome. All right, my last one, my number one. This one to me was the one that not only defined the decade, but it just kind of, I think it encapsulated so much of what you were talking about earlier, but it is The Social Network. David Fincher's Social Network.
Yes.
We get the Trent Reznor score, but it's,
Sorkin.
It's not even, it is a movie about Facebook, but it's just as much a movie about the time that it was made. And
Agreed.
he encapsulates that time so perfectly in here with the Winklevoss twins and all this stuff, and like just this like upper echelon like shitty kids, but it was in the stage of the internet's not just started and the possibilities are endless.
Yeah,
right?
it's
funny, like right there.
It's funny because your best movie of this last decade is actually a movie that's about the previous decade.
It's true.
Because you have Napster in there, and you got MySpace in there, and you got the Winklevoss trend. Like, you've got all these characters that were these big players.
And it's ultimately just like a legal battle
1999, 2000,
movie, right?
2001. Yeah, totally.
We kind of see the birth of Facebook, obviously, and Mark Zuckerberg and all that stuff. But like,
boy, don't you wish that
this movie is so rewatchable. I get sucked into it every time it's on, and it could be 30 minutes in, it could be 2 hours in, and I get drawn in every time.
But don't you wish that there's a way that all of the parts of the movie that make it so good could still exist, but that they would have waited another X amount of years to make it? Because, boy, Mark Zuckerberg goes from being in this movie as one kind of character where you're like, oh, there could be some interesting stakes here, to nowadays with the fake news stuff on Facebook and like him having to go up in front of Congress and like this whole idea of like, well, what information are you willing to kick off of Facebook and what aren't you?
Don't you think it would be different?
Yeah. But if you still got, what's his bucket, Jesse Eisenberg, to play the character, like, I mean, it could be really interesting where
Maybe
you're
he'll
like...
make a sequel, Social Network 2.
Electric Boogaloo. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like it's very weird though. Like he definitely seems way more like a Dr. Evil character now than he did when this first one came out.
No doubt. I mean, again, this is Fincher at the peak of his powers. I think Sorkin with this dialogue. You have this amazing cast with Rooney Mara,
yes,
and Andrew Garfield and.
Justin Timberlake. Yeah,
yes.
he's great. He's
is
great.
outstanding in this movie. Man, this movie, for some reason, sticks with me. It's completely rewatchable. I love it every time I watch it. And there's not a lot of movies I don't know. The ultimate key to a great movie is that you can rewatch it again and pick up new stuff about it every time, and it seems like a new movie every time you watch it, right?
Right.
And this is that for me.
I'd say that this one is that for me. So, and if I may, one of my favorite movies of the last decade, I'm just going to give you the IMDb description really quick.
A wheelchair-bound boy gets rescued by an alien.
That's not in this last decade.
I know.
This is a movie about two people whose behaviors are affected by a complex parasite without knowing it that has a three-stage life cycle in which it passes from humans to pigs to orchids. This is Shane Carruth's Upstream Color.
Oh, I thought it was Tree of Life.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, might be.
Upstream Color. Nice job.
Shane Carruth is like he.
That's your best movie of the decade, huh?
It's I mean, I'd say. I mean, I think mine are more split. I think a little bit, but it's definitely. It's up there. It's really up there.
A lot of people may have not even heard of this movie, so I'm so glad that it's on there. It's on my list that didn't make it, but it was absolutely on my mind.
I've watched it several times, and it sticks with me for so long. And Shane Carruth to me he's like a modern day. Whether you want to go with Truffaut or you want to go to a Herzog, he's one of these punk rock dudes that's like, this is my camera. And I'm going to film, and when I get done filming, I'm gonna cut that film, right? And like when I get done with that, here's the soundtrack, right? And like he does it all.
Yeah.
And it's why the dude's only made 2 movies, right?
It's true.
It's because it takes him, I think, a long time to both make the movie and to get together the budget for it, because he's the executive producer on this stuff too. Like these are his movies.
Yeah.
And
he acts in it.
His first movie, obviously Primer, which would probably be one of my favorite sci-fi movies of the last decade, right?
Yeah.
And here, the same thing is true again. And just the weird levels of nuance in this story. This is not especially in this last decade, where, as we were saying, so many movies are made by committee, right?
Yeah.
There isn't just a guy with a notebook saying, here are my thoughts, here are my dreams, these are my ideas. But instead, you have a whole group of people trying to figure all this stuff out and spoon feed it to you, so that you're like, did you get it, you dumbass? Did you get the point of the movie? Here's another movie. You're going to take it and eat it and like it. Instead, Carruth is like, I'm going to tell this very complex story out of order. I'm not going to explain anything to you. When you meet your main female lead, she's just been held captive for possibly months in her apartment by some guy who has drugged her and convinced her that she can't eat solid foods, and then hypnotized her using parts of Thoreau's Walden.
Yes.
Right? And she's got this parasite inside of her, but you barely know any of those things. You find out once she kind of snaps out of it and realizes that her bank accounts have been completely withdrawn. It's like he gives you zero answers. This movie is so impenetrable that it takes multiple rewatches to start picking up on bits and pieces of what it is you're actually seeing.
Well, that's what Primer is too.
But it's haunting the entire time, and it's beautiful to look at.
Absolutely beautiful. Stunningly beautiful. And they made Primer for less than $25,000 or something.
Yeah.
So he actually has a little bit of a budget here, and he's able to make it look beautiful. But the use of sound here is massive.
And
right?
I don't think I wrote down the actress's name, but I love her, and she's actually done quite a bit since then. She was on the TV show The Killing.
Oh, okay.
I can't think of her name. I'll put it here, but she's one of my favorite sort of up and coming actresses that I've seen in things. Really, really like her, and seeing her here, she just does such a fantastic job, and just to see these two characters learning to they found each other, and they realize, oh, whatever it was that's out there, this supernatural sort of entity, this thing that's harmed both of us.
Yeah, they have this shared like
experience,
trauma.
the shared trauma. And so they're discovering the mysteries of it themselves. And there's some beauty in that at least to me, I'm one of those few people that really didn't like The Lobster and didn't like Killing of a Sacred Deer. I appreciate what's the director?
Yorgos Lanthimos.
Lanthimos. I couldn't remember how to pronounce his last name.
I agree.
But I like what he's going for, but it doesn't resonate with me. I can't have any attachment to it because the people act too strange.
Yeah.
Whereas here, this is actually quite similar in a lot of ways to The Lobster. When you're really looking at these two people experiencing this very almost supernatural based trauma of this thing that they've experienced. But here, it's just as strange. The movie, without giving anything away, one of the movie's most pinnacle dramatic moments has two people standing looking at two pigs. Yet, if you've bought in, when we get to that part, at least for me, I get chills in that moment. Like, it's completely effective. It's completely absurd, but for some reason,
it's not
totally
for everybody.
works. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
But my God, if you really are tired of being spoon-fed films and treated like an idiot or like a child, watch Upstream Color, because it is haunting. It's gorgeous, and I feel like it says something really powerful about the human condition.
Definitely the most underrated movie of the decade, right? Like,
I'd say so. Yeah.
I bet you won't find a lot of people talking about Upstream Color.
You know what's funny? I looked at a couple of lists of sort of best of the decade, and I saw it on some of those lists, which made me feel good about the world. You know what I mean? Because it is hard at some point to not just feel like popcorn. Yeah. Just eat all the popcorn. Like, I think it's important to seek out those films
Should we go over a few that didn't quite make our list, and we'll just kind of list them out. We don't have to talk about each one. You talked about a lot of them throughout kind of our top fives here. Nightcrawler was on there for me. The Witch, Upstream Color. Annihilation was really close to making my list as well. Much. Whiplash for me was another one.
Martha Marcy May Marlene.
Nice.
Love that film.
He's got a new
Almost
movie
made it on my
upcoming
list.
Sundance. I'm excited to see.
Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
Badass movie.
Excellent movie. Yeah, that was on the top of a lot of lists that I looked at. And I absolutely appreciate that movie for sure.
Definitely. Spotlight, also one that I really loved a lot.
One that I was really happy to see got mentioned. I wouldn't have thought of it, but I was really happy to see was A Separation.
I saw that too. Movie. I love that movie.
Absolutely
that's
amazing.
A fantastic
film.
film.
I can see why someone would consider that.
Winter's Bone, I think another fantastic film. Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's a great film.
Absolutely.
I like that one a lot.
Boyhood for me, I thought was monumental.
I haven't seen that.
We're going to review that soon in our next festival.
Short Term 12.
Yes, I showed you that one.
Yeah, you did show me that one.
That
that one made a big dent for me. Other documentaries, Into the Abyss.
Oh, yeah.
As well as The Interrupters. Both of those fantastic documentaries.
I would maybe say this is a spoof, but What We Do in the Shadows is one of the great movies.
It's fantastic.
Of the last decade, especially when it comes to comedies.
Oh, I totally agree.
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
up there.
can I give you another?
I'm going to do my last one here.
Go, okay.
And for someone who doesn't like, I'm not like a huge Spider-Man person, but Into the Spider-Verse was up there for me.
That almost made it onto my list.
It's so good.
I think it's
everything that not only a Spider-Man movie should be, but it's everything a comic book movie should be.
I think it is the best comic book movie of this last decade is Into the Spider-Verse.
I mean,
I really do. It's the only one on this list. Inventive and interesting. Really quick for all of my fellow horror nerds out there, 2000 to 2010 or 2009, really rough decade for horror movies. In my opinion, one of the bests of that entire decade was still a remake. It was The Ring, right? We just did not have a lot of great ones. We had tons and tons of remakes. 28 Days Later came out. There's a couple good ones in there. But this last decade, obviously The Witch, we talked about that.
That's on my list.
I talked about Hereditary. Some other ones. This one, these two, not totally horror movies, but definitely more in the horror genre. I'd say Antichrist is a pretty fantastic, bonkers ass.
You can handle it.
Horror-based film. I Saw the Devil, another one.
Oh, excellent.
And then some more. House of the Devil, You're Next. Fantastic. The sort of documentary, The Nightmare, same guys that did Room 237.
Yeah.
I love that one. The Hallow, We Are Still Here. We talked about The Witch, and then the last one is A Dark Song. And a lot of these are online on streaming. Yeah. But yeah, so this decade, I think that there was a lot more money thrown at independent horror than I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic.
I mean, you didn't even mention Get Out or Us or anything like that.
That's true. That's true. Obviously, those ones too, and I mentioned Babadook earlier,
Babadook's
and
so
A
good.
Quiet Place, of course.
Oh yeah, excellent.
But yeah, I mean, what an incredible.
Conjuring's really good. Was that the second?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I didn't even count
James
those.
Wan.
Yeah, I didn't even count the James Wan films with The Conjuring and Insidious.
Yeah.
Most of the other ones I went with are more like art house, less well known.
Still, those are really solid.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it was I mean, again, for somebody like me,
yeah,
it was a great decade.
Awesome. This was a great decade, and honestly, I think every year it's really exciting to we'll get into this in next week's episode where we do our top 10, or we'll do our tops and flops of 2019 and really get into 2019 years.
So this is something from our old show.
Yeah.
So those new viewers that may not have listened to our old podcast, Palter sees a lot more movies than I do. So he always does his best of the year, and then I do the ones that I'm really glad I didn't see, as well as the ones that I hope I don't have to see this next year. So I'm really just passing judgment on what I've
everything.
What I've well, yes, that too, but what I've gleaned from the cultural miasma around me, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Cultural miasma.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Nice.
All right, please like and subscribe if you like what you see/hear. Go to Instagram, go to Twitter, go to Facebook, do all that stuff for us. We'd love for you to write us, subscribe, do all that stuff. Thank you very much. This was quite a decade for movies.
Definitely.
I get excited that, there's every year we can count on an awesome movie coming out, like at least 5 to 10 awesome movies.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's just a lot there. You're able to find stuff way easier than you could even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many streaming services now that like someone's going to pick it up.
If anything, it just gets lost in the abyss of shit out there.
Well, which is why it's good that I have friends like you that go to Sundance and you can tell me what I should see. And then I'm like, when it pops up in my feed, I'm like, oh shit, I should watch that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next year.
So this will have aired by now, but do you think people liked the new Star Wars movie?
I don't know. I mean, I wonder. It's funny because, we were without Star Wars for so long that it was like when Disney announced, like.
So are you counting the prequels?
No.
You say we were without Star Wars for so long.
No. I think actually the prequels helped this attitude of like, where's our Star Wars? Because they didn't look or feel anything like the old movies. That when Disney was like, look, you guys, we're doing this and we're gonna do it right.
Yeah.
That everybody got really excited, and then obviously this is not news to anybody, but like. We were saturated with it, right? We were too inundated with it.
Now it's with us forever.
Right, and there was way too much Star Wars. But I think like right now, like people are totally in love with the Mandalorian.
That's solid.
And so it's like the idea of, but remember Rey and Finn, and remember those guys from 2 years ago? And they're like, kind of.
They also put Solo out since then.
Yeah.
I think that was after Last Jedi. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna watch it for sure.
Yeah, me too. I
think it looks pretty epic. And J.J. Abrams, I trust him. He did
Force Awakens. Yep.
And he's just he's a good action director, right? He can do action really well.
He's solid. He's really solid. I thought the Star Trek movies were great.
I couldn't tell you half the plots in Last Jedi because I've only seen it a couple times, but it wasn't memorable like
I think
some of the
I
other
only
movies
saw it once, and there were whole sections I was like, oh yeah, they did a really slow chase through space. I forgot about that part. And Laura Dern's in it, and she has purple hair, and then she dies in it. Yeah, that's all I remember.
I'm just gonna, when the opening credits start, I'm in the theater. I'm just gonna go, please don't suck, please don't suck, please don't suck, and just wish it into the world.
And that's what no, that's a good way of doing it.
That's all I can do.
That's a good idea.
It's sad that I don't really care about it.
Listen, they're kids movies.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're just kids movies. Yeah.
I'm happy to watch a kids movie if it's good.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. So, I'll sit down and watch any of the Harry Potter movies any day of the week.
Oh hell yeah.
But like, I'm not going to walk around in a Harry Potter t-shirt. It's just not going to happen.
You sure? No.
This is not a Harry Potter t-shirt.